With the murder of the soldier Lee Rigby in Woolwich, Britain has been rocked by not just the horror of what happened, the crime, but very much the response that has happened in its aftermath. My son, one of my sons who lives in Sheffield, was standing at a bus stop the day after the murder, and a passenger who was also waiting for the bus just began to shout at him, "It's your fault. You're to blame." My son was really surprised and shocked by this. He's a Christian for one, but he just walked away, fearing that this wasn't the way to respond, or it wasn't any value in responding to somebody who was clearly upset by what had occurred just the day before in London. But it really made me think, how do we respond to violence and hatred? I think Jesus Christ had a response that he shared with us, and you find it in that first sermon that he preached when he was walking the streets of Palestine, again an area which today knows much violence. But Jesus said, "Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." You read that in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 44. How do we respond to hatred? Do we respond by meeting it with further hatred? Or do we do what Christ would have us do, and that is respond with love? As it happened, Christ met a lot of hatred throughout his life, but every time he responded to hatred with a heart that was just filled with love towards others. It made me mindful that in 2010, my wife and I, following the General Conference session in Atlanta, Georgia, we had a few days following the conference session, and we had nothing planned whatsoever. But we said, well, after the session, we'll sort of open up a map and just begin to look and see where we might go. And as it happened, and we really didn't intend for it to be this way, it ended up as a kind of a civil rights tour of the South in the United States. And part of our journey took us to Memphis and the Lorraine Motel, where Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated. And whilst we were there, and of course the Lorraine Motel is now part of the National Civil Rights Museum, during the tour there is a film that was shown at the time called The Witness, and I'm not sure how many people were in there, maybe 100, 200, a lot of school children. But I don't think there was a dry eye in the auditorium having watched the film. Not just because of the prophetic message that Dr. King preached. He preached the sermon, of course, before he was assassinated the very next day, but it was very much the strength of a man who met so much hatred with love and just wanting to affirm every human being upon this planet. And there are words that Dr. Martin Luther King said, at least wrote, that I think are worth sharing with us at this time as we think about how do we respond to what has happened in Woolwich. And he wrote, "The ultimate weakness of violence is that it is a descending spiral, begetting the very thing it seeks to destroy. Instead of diminishing evil, it multiplies it. Through violence you may murder the liar, but you cannot murder the lie nor establish the truth. Through violence you may murder the hater, but you do not murder hate. In fact, violence merely increases hate, so it goes. Returning violence for violence multiplies violence, adding deeper darkness to a night already devoid of stars. Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that. I think in those words that Dr. King shared, which really echo and reflect what Christ was saying, the Christian response to hatred in this time has to be love. There are many people who are seeking to capitalize on the murder of Lee Rigby. They have their own agendas. Indeed, one of the suspect murderers had said, he hoped to start a war. And for the Christian, yes, we're involved. We know that we're involved in a warfare. But the war that we should be fighting is not one that is of hatred, of violence, but a war that is really about love. Admittedly, the news service generally is only interested in hate. Hate does get on the news. But as Christians, I believe our response is to show that we're not going to meet hate, but with love, with kindness, with compassionate, and with a sincere desire to show that Jesus Christ is alive. It's going to be tough. It is very tough trying to show people love when they are hating us. But that's what we are called to do. So let us respond to the haters by becoming lovers.